Now, just before we finish our Whose Land, which is about 24 minutes long, normal length again this week. Now, one of the sad things about the Palestinians, particularly the Palestinian Authority, not to speak of their twin brother Hamas, they really like to incite their people to hate the Jews. So, you know, the incitation of the Palestinians, leaders, to their own people is really causing mayhem. And at the moment, from Gaza, they're still gathering on the border with Israel and Gaza for the riots which started some 6 months ago. And one of the curses to Israel is the fact that the Palestinians are continually in the Gaza Strip flying over these incendiary balloons and kites, and as the sea breeze from the Gaza Strip comes in from the west, it blows them into Israel. And it's causing havoc. Over 8,000 acres of good nature reserve and land that the Israelis planted. It was desert. They turned it into reserve, has been burned. And not to speak of many crops in the area farmers had planted have been burned up. Livelihoods are at stake. And the Israelis show total patience in their response. They are trying everything they can to stop this happening. But it's all because it's incited by their leaders. Just recently, in the last couple of weeks, there was a pro-Israel American Jew who lived on what is called the West Bank in the disputed territories, who was murdered by a 17-year-old Arab who was incited to kill him. The Jewish man managed to shoot his assailant dead before he succumbed to the wounds that was inflicted upon him. That's quite big news in Israel. It was a huge story. We don't get that so much out here in New Zealand. But it's the culture of hate which is really one of the reasons why the American regime under Donald Trump has actually cut millions of dollars of aid to the Palestinian Authority and to the UNESCO, as well as to what is called UNRWA, which is United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which helps support the Palestinian refugees. And the reason is because their leaders are continually inciting them to hate. One of the problems is that the 17-year-old guy that murdered that American Jew I just spoke of, although he was killed because of his actions, his family immediately got thousands of dollars in the bank as a reward for what their son had done, with the promise of still more to come. So when you've got, and he's held up as a martyr. So this is very hard to combat, you know. You're dealing with a civilization that is actually totally alien to what we're used to in the West. And that's what our politicians do not appreciate. That's why we have to educate them with things like that. Now, I thought what I would do is just share with you some of the positive stuff about what some of the Palestinians are saying about Israel before we watch our DVD. And I'm conscious of the time. Look to my iPhone. This is what one guy said. I picked this up just a couple of years ago. The general head of security for the Dubai Emirate, Lieutenant Colonel Dahi Kalthan Tamim, has stated that the Palestinians should abandon their aspiration for an independent state and merge with Israeli Jews in a united binational state instead. Now, his comments were, "Today the Jews are heading the world's economy. Without the Jews, you Arabs would not have known how to deposit your money in the bank." This is an Arab. This is an Arab from the Middle East, the head of the security for Dubai. Tamim claimed that a joint Jewish-Palestinian state will only prosper under Israeli leadership. In another tweet that spurred controversy, the Dubai security chief wrote, and I quote, "We should not treat Jews as our enemies. We should treat them as cousins with whom we have a controversy over land inheritance." In order to test the feasibility of his idea, Tamim asked his Twitter followers if they think Palestinians and Jews can live together in an Israeli-ruled state. Not surprisingly, 57% of the followers answered that Jews have no place in our country. Unfortunate, but there are some good ones out there who actually can see the sense in working with the Jewish people. This is a good one. Ismail Khaldi is an Arab citizen of Israel and the nation's first high-ranking Muslim in the Israeli Foreign Service, just to prove that Israel is not an apartheid state. They have the Arabs in top jobs in Israel. It's not like South Africa was. And while Israeli society is far from perfect, he said, minorities in Israel fare far better in Israel than any other country in the Middle East. Now he wrote, and I quote, he said, I am a proud Israeli. This is a diplomat for Israel, an Arab diplomat. I'm a proud Israeli, along with many other non-Jewish Israelis such as Druze, Baha'i, Bedouin Christians, and Muslims, who live in one of the most culturally diversified societies and the only true democracy in the Middle East. Like America, Israeli society is far from perfect, but let us deal honestly. By any yardstick you choose, educational opportunity, economic development, women's rights, freedom of speech and assembly, legislative representation, Israel's minorities fare far better than any other country in the Middle East. Try and tell that to the United Nations. And this is why the Americans are so upset with the UN. You know, I'm glad Donald Trump went in there blazing his six-shooter. Just today, actually. Because it's a biased organisation, and we must pray for our own Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, that she sees sense through the nonsense of the UN, because a lot of it is biased against this little Jewish state. Another one was an Arab journalist called Khalid Tamo. Writing in the Gatestone Institute, he declared to a Muslim audience during the Durban Review Conference that while there are serious problems facing the Arab sector in Israel, he went on to say, and I quote, he said, Israel is a wonderful place to live, and we are happy to be there. This is an Arab citizen of Israel. He said, Israel is a free and open country. If I were given the choice, I would rather live in Israel as a second-class citizen than as a first-class citizen in Cairo, Gaza, Amman, or Ramallah. That says it all. And this is an interesting one. This is actually a Jordanian journalist who is very upset with the King of Jordan, King Hussein, and the Jordanian regime, who says, and I quote, Jordan would be better off under Israeli rule. So you can see why he upsets the Jordanians a little bit. But he also, according to him, and he's caused a lot of controversy, but his voice is being heard, he said, this is what he says, he's an educated Arab from Jordan. He's actually a Palestinian living in Jordan. He says, an average Jordanian who never engages in politics endures hunger, poverty, and humiliation daily by the hands of the king. That's King Hussein in Jordan, bordering the state of Israel. So you can imagine what happens to a secular opposition activist. Jordan is an apartheid state, not Israel, he declares. And he goes on to say, look at the Israeli Arabs and how they live in luxury. That should answer the question of whether Israel is an apartheid state or not. All of this Israel is an apartheid state thing is promoted by the king's regime in Jordan to separate and segregate Jordanians in the name of hating Israel. I could only wish that I was an Arab in Israel with an Israeli passport. That's what he said. And then he goes on to say that even Jordan would be better off under Israeli rule. All the Palestinians who work in Israel, and there's hundreds of thousands of them, all the Palestinians who work in Israel, he says, wish they had Israeli citizenship, and this is what the Palestinians themselves say. So you're not hearing this out there on the news. Interesting. And a Kuwaiti journalist sparked outrage when he admitted that Israel is not an occupying power. This is another Arab living in Kuwait. Now, these are countries where your head can get chopped off. So he said, he was Abdullah al-Hadlak. If you can pronounce that better than me, come and see me afterwards. He was on Kuwaiti's Al-Ra'i TV. He said, when the state of Israel was established in 1948, there was no state called Palestine. He's learned his history. Like it or not, he said, on TV in Kuwait, Israel is an independent sovereign state. It exists, and it has a seat at the United Nations, and most peace-loving and democratic countries recognize it. The group of states that do not recognize Israel are the countries of tyranny and oppression. And he goes on to say, there is no occupation. There is a people returning to its promised land. Are you aware that the history of the Israelites is ancient, predating Islam? He's saying this in Kuwait on TV. Therefore, we Muslims must acknowledge that the Israelites have a right to that land and that they have not plundered it. Isn't that good? And let me finish with this one, because this was an Israeli Arab lady called Sarah Zoabi became the focus of local media in Israel in Israel and the Palestinian territories after her son Muhammad spoke out publicly in support of the Jewish state. Palestinian Arab speaking out in support of Israel. And she was asked a number of questions, and her answers are these. She said, and this is recorded in public interviews, the Palestinians are suffering, but under their own leadership. If they would stop terrorism and recognize the right of Israel to exist, I think their suffering would end. Israeli Arabs do not suffer. Some claim there is discrimination, but we live much better than Arabs living under Arab rule. Okay? She went on to say, I really admire the Jewish people. After all they suffered, they bounced back and built this country that respects everyone. I'm sure that an Arab woman in any other country around does not possess the rights that I have. She's actually right. And I'll finish with these comments she made. She says, apartheid, because the claim is that Israel's an apartheid state. This is what John Minto, who was the great hero of South African apartheid in the 70s, is trying to relive his ancient dream, you know, by putting the finger on Israel and saying, apartheid state, yes, BDS, yes, it's given me a cause now, I can live again. John Minto of Hire a Protest. And she said, apartheid, apartheid, that would mean separate buses for Jews and Arabs. Does such a thing exist here? Or segregated coffee shops. Does that exist here? These accusations need to stop. We coexist excellently. Together we will go through fire and water, Arabs and Jews. I reject everything that they say about Israel because I live here. And I know what I'm talking about, and I say this as an Arab woman, a Muslim, and a proud Israeli. So these are some of the things that I actually put in that submission to the government 3 years ago, because they need to know some of this stuff, you know. Otherwise, the only source of information is coming the easy way through BBC, CNN, and the other anti-Israel and anti-Jewish news agencies. And let me finish with this one firsthand. We were in Israel in 2016 in January, and there the lady we were staying with, Helen, a Jewish lady, she had a Palestinian Arab cleaner cleaning her house. So I'm left in the house with this lady cleaning one day because my wife Jo, Helen, and my mum have all decided to go and spend my money. Out to the mall. This is on the West Bank. This is a Ma'aleh Adumim, is a Jewish city. Really, it is a city just on the eastern side of Jerusalem, and it's referred to as on occupied territory, which we know is not. And anyway, I asked Takreeb was her name, Takreeb. And I said, okay, tell me. And I was trying to make it in such a way that she was not under pressure to answer my question in a way that would please me, a white guy from New Zealand. I said, tell me the truth. What would you much rather have? Would you much rather live under the Palestinian Authority or Israeli governance? She said, Israeli governance. She said, all this other stuff is bull beep. Then I knew she could speak proper English. And she said, what you're hearing is all nonsense. She said, we get a better deal under the Israelis. And you know, that's true. What the BDS, boycotts, divestments and sanctions, try to do is claim Israel's apartheid, and they try to get companies to divest their funds out of Israel, not to send their companies in there. But what they're actually doing is destroying the jobs of Arabs. Palestinian Arabs living on the West Bank are paid better by Israeli shareholders and factory owners than from their own people, and that's just a fact. So it is not apartheid. And when you hear, but the truth is that there would be at least as many Palestinian Arabs who don't want an Israeli state, who would prefer an Arab state. So, and I've heard that. I've got both sides of the opinion. We had a journalist, Johannes Gerloff, come through a couple of years ago, and I asked him privately, and I've heard that confirmed from other sources, that it's like that. There are still a large number of Arabs who don't want a two-state solution. The trouble is, their one-state solution is one Arab state, one Palestinian state. But there are many, as you've heard me say, there are many who would want a one-state solution under Israeli governance. All right. Just to remind you of where we're up to, the first week talked about the Jewish historical right to the land. It is theirs historically. The second week we saw the pledge of the Balfour Declaration was just a promise, a pledge, but it was only a promise, but that promise was taken and written into international law in the Mandate for Palestine by the League of Nations and unanimously signed off by all 51 nations of the League, which was the forerunner of the United Nations, and New Zealand was one of the 51 nations who fully backed the Mandate for Palestine. Last week we saw the beginning of Britain's betrayal against the Jews, against their dream for a state, when the British, with no international backing or authority, started to backpedal on not only the pledge they made in the Balfour Declaration, but the Mandate for Palestine that they were given the trusteeship to see enacted. So it certainly makes you a bit angry about what the British did, doesn't it? My goodness. Well, some of you remember Derek Prince coming out to New Zealand and teaching, a great teacher. And I always remember him stating, and he was himself a British subject, originally from Britain, then lived in the United States. But he always claimed that the reason why the great British Empire diminished into what it is today was because of that hostile attitude toward the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And we have agreement. Fantastic. Okay. All right. Before I sort of wind this all up, are there any questions tonight before we sort of bring things round to a close? So let's march on. Now, can you see just how the whole international community has gone off track with a UN resolution in 1947 that seemed to erase everything that had gone before it when it had no right to do that? Because, and this is sort of, when we go out doing our protesting for Israel, we're armed first of all with what we know of the knowledge of God. But the message we take out there is this one you've heard. The fact that Israel has the legitimacy to live on those disputed territories because it was given to her in the Mandate for Palestine. And the Arabs themselves, the Palestinians, already have their state in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So when New Zealand's Foreign Minister at the end of 2016, not quite 2 years ago, Murray McCully, the great Murray McCully, when he led that resolution against Israel, and I thought I would read to you some of what he actually had here in that resolution, if I can find it. Tangled up all my notes. The resolution known as UN Resolution 2334 was actually a resolution that Egypt invented, that before the end of 2016, Egypt was going to bring forth a resolution calling Israel's settlements on the West Bank illegal under international law. And just days before that resolution was supposed to be brought to the United Nations, all, I reckon, according to a preconceived plan and scheme, Israel retreats from wanting to sponsor that resolution, no doubt knowing that a deal had already been made for Murray McCully to come in and say, don't worry, we'll pick up the charge. And so they co-sponsored this resolution with the likes of Malaysia, Venezuela, and Senegal, I think, very anti-Israel nations. And New Zealand joined with the anti-Israel mob in the Security Council to push this resolution through. Now, some of the things in the resolution stated, some of the points that I think are worth mentioning. No, none of it's worth mentioning. But I can tell you, to summarize it, I can tell you that it called Israeli settlements illegal. And as I've already said, I think here, when that news broke on Christmas Eve, nearly 2 years ago, it was like a knife going through my guts. And the Israelis felt a knife going through their back. And unfortunately, the knife was being thrust into the back of Israel by our own government, at least by our Foreign Minister, Murray McCully. So our result of that was we led a campaign to try and speak to our government through the media, the best way we knew how. And so, again, how many of you were on those two buses that went down on that campaign? And we had a good time down in Wellington. It was, from the time we left out the frontier to the time we got back, I think 13 hours transpired. But we had made our point, and our news story was carried on Television One, Prime TV, radio stations, and in newspaper articles throughout New Zealand. And it was that we were not happy with Murray McCully and very angry with this resolution. Well, after that, of course, you know, that was we did that protest just 6 days after the resolution. At the very end, on the 30th of December 2016, 4 weeks after that resolution and 3 weeks after that protest, we published this full-page article in the New Zealand Herald, which had an impact. And I was told that this article ended up on the desk of Murray McCully. And I was told that Murray McCully read the article. I guess he would if it's a big full-page article in the New Zealand Herald which says, "Why the land of Israel belongs to Israel, a rejection of UN Security Council Resolution 2334. And that basically was trying to educate the public and Murray McCully to the fact of what we've watched for the last 4 weeks, that Israel is not doing what's illegal, and what they were doing was they were calling it illegal when not at all. What we've watched over 4 weeks is simply telling us that Israel is legally entitled to occupy the West Bank and East Jerusalem. All that aside, I think we've come to the end of our program for 2018.